So I just want to thank the planning department, specifically Kim, but really the planning department as a whole, who I think did a wonderful job, and their counterparts in Tonawanda, of pulling together a complicated request via charter to both town boards. The charter itself was probably a complicated request, but Niagara Falls Boulevard is a big divide. It divides a community, and yet that community happens to straddle municipal borders. So tying it together was not easy. We were very happy, I think, as a board to have made the progress we did. In a minute, Kim's going to introduce Dover Coal, but I wanted to thank you on behalf of the town of Amherst Town Board for all of the work that you and the planning department have done here.
All right, well, thank you as well for attending and listening to our presentation tonight. I'd just like to introduce Amy Groves from Dover Coal. They were the major consultant on this project, along with some other consultants who Amy will describe later in her presentation. I think the towns of Amherst and Tonawanda are very proud of the product that has come out of this and the public participation that we had. And so we're very excited to present to you the final plan for the Willow Ridge and Parkview neighborhoods. I'll turn it over to Amy.
All right, well, thank you all for having me here today. And as Kim mentioned, I'm here representing a larger team, which included Dover Coal, as well as Nelson Nygaard, who are transportation planners, Glenn Kellogg, who is an urban economist, consultants from Bergman, who helped with community outreach and participation. And we all worked together, came together at the request of the towns. The focus originally was, Niagara Falls Boulevard, looking at how can we, take this street that has caused some safety problems. It's difficult in times to walk and bike in the corridor, and how can we make it a more beautiful, more enjoyable corridor that provides more value to the towns. And so here's one of the inspirational images that came from the plan. How can we get wider sidewalks and safer crossings and street trees? So I'll get to all that in a minute, but first some background information. The study area for this project basically goes from 290 in the south up to the Erie County border in the north. It includes the boulevard as well as the Willow Ridge and Parkview neighborhoods on either side. And so we're continuing work that was started already by the towns in 2018. There was the towns did the pedestrian safety audit that you see here on the screen, and that was followed by 2019 by New York State's pedestrian safety evaluation. And some of the results from this work are already visible on the corridor with improved lightings and some things that have happened. But the towns wanted to take it further, so they issued the charter that you all mentioned just a few minutes ago. That was basically our scope of work for this project. So how do we, work with the community to get a vision for this area, not only for transportation, but for land use and recreation and pedestrian safety. So we started a little over a year ago. We had a community kickoff by Zoom. We had over 60 people join us that night, and we gave some background on what we anticipated coming up for the project. And then we had a big amount of participation in April of last year. We had what we call a design charrette, where we had a number of events over a series of a week. We had a hands-on design session you see here. We rolled out base maps and did some group brainstorming. We all got on a bus together and drove up and down the corridor and looked at key sites and opportunity areas and areas where there's challenges today that could maybe be improved in the future. We redid the hands-on exercise again by Zoom a couple days later for folks who couldn't make it in person, so they could attend. And of course, we have recordings of these meetings. They're on the project website for anyone who wanted to get caught up later. We had a design studio we set up for a full week, and so we brought in different stakeholders, the Chamber of Commerce, different folks who represented the towns and the county, and parks and trail advocates, transportation agencies, different business owners. As we were coming up with ideas, we would check with them, ask them what they thought. And at the end of the long week, we had what we called work in progress presentations. So it wasn't the plan, but it was the foundation of the plan. The kind of the big ideas that came forward that you find in the plan report. And so then we went back to our office and we created this report document. So trying to make it very graphically friendly, easy to read, but having all those big ideas and really explaining the reasons behind them. There's 3 main themes that go throughout the report. There's make it safe, connect, and refresh. And so as you go through, and all the actions are organized according to those themes. Then we put that report out and asked for feedback on it. So it was posted online and available here in the town for folks to come look at it through November, December. We came back in March and did a community presentation at the middle school. And then we also had a lot of online engagement with different surveys and asking people for feedback that way. So from all those comments, we have what is now the final draft report. So I'm going to go through some of the main ideas, and then at the end we can have some discussion questions. But section 4 is the Make It Safe section, and you see the actions here on the screen. There's a proposal to create a joint resolution between the towns that emphasizes that safety is the highest priority. So why is this important? This is important when there's conversations down the road with state or local leaders, when there's opportunities for design changes, that safety is taken into account as the most important, highest priority as decisions are being made. There's recommendations for up to 4 additional signals with crosswalks to increase safe crossing opportunities. There's recommendations to use street design to change the design speed, so that means how fast drivers feel they should be going based on the design of the roadway and the street elements. There's a proposal for Niagara Falls Boulevard to be reconfigured to balance the needs of everyone, so not just drivers, but to also meet the needs of pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users. And there's a recommendation to initiate planning for a joint access management along the corridor. So here is one of the illustrations from the plan, shows what we mean when we say reconfigure Niagara Falls Boulevard. So basically taking any extra width that we can out of the vehicular lanes, narrowing them up just a bit so that we have space for a shared use path and landscape strip on the side of the boulevard. So again, kind of keeping the function of the 5-lane roadway through there, but making it so that it is possible and safer to walk and bike along the corridor. And this fits in with the speed management goal. So again, when the road is designed to go faster, then folks will, no matter what speed is posted on the road, they'll go as fast as they feel comfortable going. So if we narrow down those travel lanes a bit, might get the speeds under control. And this is really important with safety because obviously when an accident happens and cars are going faster, the results are much worse than when cars are going slower. We talked about the intersection spacing. So, there's, you see here on the screen, the existing signals in blue. This was one of the big opportunities that came from the earlier reports, your pedestrian safety audit and the DOT report, wanting to have more opportunities for safe crossings. So, these could be new full signals. They could also be hawk signals like you have right out front here that are pedestrian activated. But the goal is to have, more opportunities to cross in this section. And looking at the corridor from overhead, you can kind of see some of the challenges with access management and the continuous curb cuts going along the corridor. And so the recommendations include here highlighted on the map. This one is turned a bit, so north is to the right side of the screen. But you can see in the blue highlights, these are where there's existing opportunities for medians today. And then in yellow, there's opportunities for additional medians when there's more driveway consolidation, perhaps in the future. So again, that would help to eliminate some of those conflict points. So as we had the draft report out, we asked in the online survey, would people supported the various action steps. You can see here the results of that survey. I think we had some pretty positive results. One stuck out to us, the improved signal spacing was a little bit lower than the others in terms of the amount of support versus not support. So we read through all the comments, and generally that came down to folks who are concerned about what that meant for the travel time through the corridor. So that is something that as you're moving forward with implementation, that you can kind of study that further and make decisions. But generally, if the signals are timed and there's newer signal technology utilized, that the actual travel time should really not be impacted too greatly by the new signals. So this actually combines together the online survey, which is you see here in blue, and the in-person meeting we had back in March in green. We did some phone polling with people's phones, and we asked them which of the Make It Safe action steps they felt should be of the highest priority. So we thought it was interesting that of all of the steps, all of them are important. They all got some votes, but the reconfigure the boulevard into a multimodal corridor scored highest on both the online and in-person meetings. So although that is probably the most challenging and one of the more difficult actions to pull off, just in terms of budget and the amount of coordination amongst the towns and state agencies, it is also very important to folks who came to our meetings. So the next section of the report is about Connect, and so this is about how to strengthen connections throughout the study area. It includes a proposal to change the rules for development, which emphasize placemaking and walkable connections rather than driving in parking lots. There's a strategy for a complete network of on and off-street trails that build upon those that are already in the town and regional plans. The concepts for Ellicott Creek Bridge area that improve safe crossings and expand the trail network in that area. Recommendations for improving pedestrian and bike infrastructure on neighborhood streets, and proposals to improve connections to Ellicott Creek Park. So walking through a few of those, here is the trails network that you can find in the plan. The orange lines here are existing trails, and then the dashed lines are all potential new trails. But you can see there's some that are called planned on and off street, and so those are all planned trails that we find throughout the various planning documents we looked at, your LWRP, your Parks and Recreation Plan, the Town of Tonawanda's Complete Streets Plan, and the regional GBN RTC plan. And so many of these, this was just consolidating all of those trails onto one map. And then we couldn't help but notice there were some other connections that could be useful, such as, those are what we see as the proposed trails, such as the parallel network to the boulevard, or some key connections through the neighborhood. So we did ask people on the online survey which of those trails connections they thought were most important, and interestingly enough, they highlighted the ones that are in the existing planning documents. So good job with already identifying the important connections. But then again, also connections to Ellicott Creek Park and having a parallel network to the boulevard also rose to the top of that survey. So looking overhead here at Ellicott Creek Bridge, this is existing conditions. And so we started to look at first, what could potential public improvements in this area could be. And I'm just going to pull on some labels here. You can kind of see some of the things we're thinking about. Again, right-sizing the travel lanes so we have a little more room for sidewalks across the bridge itself, making improved crossings and safer intersections, reimagining some of the streets to be more pedestrian-friendly. You can see off to the right a new bike and pedestrian bridge over Ellicott Creek Road, which again, connecting to Ellicott Creek Road, which would help with connectivity for pedestrians and cyclists in the area. And from all of these proposed public improvements, then we imagined, well, what could private investment come to, would build upon that. So imagining new development that's actually oriented towards the trails and having housing overlooking the creek area, or having buildings that are pulled up to public spaces along the reconfigured roadway. Throughout this section of the report, you'll find some recommendations for area neighborhood streets. Here's an example, Willow Ridge Drive, and so it includes provisions for just simple restriping. You can see here, like taking the existing roadway, which has two 14-foot travel lanes, and dividing that into two 10-foot travel lanes and on-street parking in the section that's close to the boulevard. And as you get a little further away, actually taking that extra space and instead having a marked bike lane. And then there's a recommendation, you see the one in the middle of the screen here for reconstruction. So this is, not the simple one, but if there's money to reconstruct the street, you could actually move the cycle track to the other side of the trees, so to make an even more enhanced bike environment there. So throughout this section of the report, again, there's a number of neighborhood streets that have those types of recommendations that could be pursued. And those restriping things could even be tested out on a trial basis and kind of see how that goes before you make any kind of permanent improvements. I wanted to highlight this one. This is Joe McCarthy Drive, so there's some recommendations for the area where there's a street, but this is actually looking at the area where it connects further to the north, which could connect to that new pedestrian bike bridge that we just saw in the rendering. So this today is what we call a paper street, so it doesn't exist on the ground, but it exists in your plat maps, that there's a right-of-way that goes behind the back of these parcels on the boulevard and behind the rear side of homes on the east side. And so the idea is that there could be a new shared use path, so pedestrian and bike connectivity through this section. And you can see, based on the feedback on our last meeting in March, we also discussed that it doesn't necessarily have to go right down the middle, but you could shift it closer to the commercial properties to give just a little more privacy to the residential neighborhood, perhaps. So it's, again, the design of that could be done in coordination with neighbors there or in coordination with any future development that happens in that area. Here is an intersection at Thistle Avenue, where there was a lot of discussion with the folks in the Parkview neighborhood about needing or wanting to have an improved crossing here. And so the proposal is for a rectangular rapid flashing beacon at this intersection where an RRFB signal, which would help to give more safety and more visibility to pedestrians crossing over to the park there. So here is, again, the results of the online survey. We found that the Connect action steps were actually the most popular of all of the action steps in the report. You know, everyone really likes the ideas of the trails and the improvements for pedestrians and cyclists through the area. Again, looking at how folks responded to in the online meeting as well as the in-person survey, you know, again, split pretty well amongst the steps, but you know, all were pretty popular. A little bit more preference, or a lot of enthusiasm, I should say, for, you know, capitalizing on Ellicott Creek as kind of a centerpiece of your towns. The last section of the report is on refresh. And so this is about how do we take the opportunity to energize the boulevard with a vibrant new mix of uses and new destinations along the corridor. It includes recommendations for how do you update your town plans, the comprehensive plan or zoning to fit the vision, recommendations to how to support investment and make property owners aware of opportunities for funding or how support for improvements, and recommendations for targeting some key nodes for new experiences, like having new walkable destinations near the neighborhoods. So, you know, when we were here a year ago, we went up and down the corridor and we took some photographs like this of, you know, vacant parcels that are just, you know, waiting for their next opportunity and wondering, you know, how can we encourage folks to make investments in this area. So our economist looked at what he called the retail gap analysis and what kinds of uses are, you know, missing in this area. What he found was, because of the amount of commercial along the corridor, as well as the amount of commercial just to the south of the study area here, that actually this area is pretty well served by commercial. And so there wasn't a lot of gap or, you know, kind of missing uses, but he did find that, you know, there's not very many, you know, walkable neighborhood type of destinations. So having some clusters of that could fit an unmet need, as well as housing. You know, there's opportunities for housing that, you know, maybe the entire corridor doesn't have to be commercial, you know, in the future, but there could be some housing opportunities mixed in there. So, you know, the town of Amherst already has a mixed-use code that could be used to help, you know, shape new development in this area. That's one of the recommendations of the plan, is, you know, making that, you know, easier to use and available to property owners. During the process, we took a couple of sample sites and did some drawings like these that looked at, well, what if we applied the code to this area? You know, what this could look like. So here we're right at the Bark Park near Creekside Drive and the Boulevard. This is one of the stops we stopped during the bus tour, and we looked, you know, we stood in the parking lot to the Bark Park and looked across to the rear service area of the retail on the Boulevard, and we thought, well, maybe this could be, you know, a better, you know, experience for having the fronts of buildings that frame, you know, public spaces, and, you know, still having that parking, but it could be, you know, along area streets or along, you know, a new park space, and, you know, having it fronted by new development in that area. We also did a similar kind of what-if drawing for the Asian Market Home Depot site. And so first started just looking at some initial steps. How can we take some of those trail connections that were shown on the map to make, new connections to the neighborhood so that people wouldn't have to get all the way out on the boulevard to come out by car, but they could get there easily by biking or walking. There's this idea for an outdoor market. I'll zoom in here, in front of the Asian market, that you could have, food trucks or, some kind of a public gathering space that for folks, this could just be on the weekends or, however you want to use that space. We then started to illustrate, well, what if the corner of the site, that large parking lot that the whole thing isn't being used, you could take a corner of that site near the neighborhood and have townhomes and make a permanent public space there. And, that could be something that could happen. We then took it a step further. Well, what if that was actually a couple of blocks of new neighborhood development and still the parking lot, right sizing that parking lot for the users that are there. And then we couldn't stop ourselves to keep drawing over the entire thing. So I don't know if that would ever happen, but it could be a long-term vision for the future. So our economist did an interesting study. He looked at your existing general business commercial zoning and then also looked at the deep corridor mixed use zoning. And he looked throughout the corridor and kind of did a kind of quick assessment of the potential for redevelopment. And so he graded the potential as low, below grade, above grade, or high. Basically high means it'd be a big return for the developer, so more likely to happen. Low would be a low return. And what he found was because of the setbacks and the parking requirements and other things in the existing zoning, that there were not very many sites that kind of fit the above grade and the high, and maybe that's why there's some kind of parcels that sit a little longer along the corridor. Versus when he looked at the mixed-use zoning, he found a lot more potential. And so that is, would be good news for developers who want to, reuse the parcels to have that opportunity. It's also good news for the town, thinking about the tax revenue that would come from, making more utilized space along those commercial properties. So here's the results of the refresh action steps. Again, in the online survey, we saw pretty positive, 67 to 79% support amongst folks who took the online survey. And again, looking at how the responses were to the in-person meeting, the adopting the mixed-use ordinances, was again one of the higher scoring actions in this section. Just to wrap it up, I'm just about done. We did ask people also which of all of the actions would be of the highest priority. And so, I think it was interesting that the connect action steps, again, were very popular. But I'm going to just make them larger here on the screen here so you can see the top 5. It's interesting. We looked at the screen before. All of them did receive some votes. So, they're all important to everybody. But, those connect action steps, again, really resonated well with the folks that we talked with. But the make it safe, the reconfiguring the boulevard, and adopting a joint resolution also came to the top. So that's what I have for today. And I thank you for your time. And I want to answer any questions y'all have.
Well, also I'll start. I guess this is more of a clarifying question, just for anybody who might be watching on video. But New York State DOT had opportunities to participate and or attend some of in fact, I think they may have attended some of the meetings. Is that correct? They did. They attended during the Charrette Week, and we actually had a meeting specifically with some representatives from DOT during that studio week. Sure. No, go ahead.
Okay. A question and a comment, or maybe 2 comments and a question. I found this was a lot of work, and thank you very much for doing this for us and for Tonawanda. And especially handy at the back was the implementation where you had the chart where you broke down the different actions. And my question would be on that, and maybe you don't have the answer to it. So it says like for a time frame. So what would be the timetable for implementation? I mean, some are immediate, some are midterm, some are long-term. So can you talk a little bit about the timetable? And then my other comment would be on page 49 of the report that we got, I was intrigued by the Grapevine because I've been there a few times. Years ago, my family, when my father's brothers and sisters were alive, we would go, and the kids would go too. It'd be a big sort of a Saturday lunch a couple times a year. They loved that restaurant. That was the first time that I had ever been there. And so I'm intrigued by the restaurant, and I see that you have mixed use with rooftop dining. And I thought that was just such an exquisite adaptation to put so close to the water. So if you had any comments about that, I thought that was very creative.
Sure. And so I
Thank
guess
you.
the first question was about the time frame. And so, of course, this is our best guess. We tried to, estimate, things that could be done, quickly and right away versus things that take more coordination and will take, many years to achieve. And I think there's kind of a mix of those things throughout the report. And, our recommendation is actually that the towns would kind of meet on a, kind of regular basis and kind of assess where they are with the actions and kind of take stock with what opportunities there are to continue to advance things. I don't know, Kim, if you want to add anything more to that, you can. But generally, those timeframes, the immediate steps are ones that are kind of like more the low-hanging fruit or kind of easy initial steps to get the ball rolling, and the midterm and the long term are those steps. And so you might see some of them actually there's a check in each box because there's obviously some conversations that are going to be easy to get started, but it'll take for example the street redesign will take a lot of time, and that's one of the more complex things to implement. So I think our recommendation is just to get started and get done what you can, and always be moving forward. The Grapevine illustration, we just again thought that was a great site. It's right there at the corner of the park, and could really really capitalize on those views, and take advantage of that. Nothing in this report is obviously not forcing anyone's hand. It's just they'll have the opportunity to do that. But I think one of the things holding it back is the design of the corridor today. But if the corridor design was improved, where it was actually felt better to have a multi-story building pulled up to it and have things on upper floors that looked out over it, I think that that site could is really a great opportunity.
I thought so. Thank you.
The interesting thing about that building is it actually protrudes into the right-of-way now. So it's like, they're as close to the right-of-way as you can get at the moment.
I wanted to
Go ahead.
make a comment or two. One of the things that struck me on the report, from having gone on that initial tour bus to the report, most of the things we talked about that day as we were driving around, trails, connectivity, being able to safely get from one side to another, became really stayed true as you went through the process. What we saw that first bus ride to the end seemed to match. I sort of figured it would have changed over time, but it didn't. And we still have people talking about they want trails, they want to be able to walk and bike or whatever mode of transportation. And, you left in our dream of the pedestrian bridge over the...
That's right.
Yeah, that one we know is probably cost prohibitive, but...
Hey, if all that other development were going to happen, right? If we thought there was a shot that Grapevine might say, hey, let's become something bigger on this site, and if we thought that the development, I mean, if you look at the existing condition there, there's not those sites. It's not so hard to imagine them developing, right? We see all this infill everywhere. You can imagine that townhomes near a creek wouldn't be that hard for the development community in Amherst to figure out. If those things happen, then maybe, an LWRP with maybe a little bit of a grant, something that bridge suddenly becomes an idea.
Yes.
I think the biggest thing, though, for me about the process was the level of commitment that the consultants, not just Dover Cole, but everybody showed to being publicly attentive, right? I mean, it was so embedded. And, you know, I know so many times, you know, projects get criticized for how come you didn't really embed the audience, and, you know, things get lost to history sometimes. But I mean, you could see it, you know, firsthand. There was an attentiveness to everything here, and that made the project overall stronger. I guess my question might be for the planning department, Dan, if you wouldn't mind coming up for a second. So we have a make it safe, adopt a joint resolution. I think we probably could all acknowledge that's probably the lowest hanging fruit here, right? Doesn't require,
Sure.
And it would require us to talk to our counterparts in Tonawanda and say, hey, let's do this. But beyond that, what about this plan? What's next for the plan, do you think? I mean, we talk about an ongoing process with the planning department that looks at the comp plan. Do you see this as something we adopt onto itself and then maybe someday figure out how to annex into the comprehensive plan? I don't think the comprehensive plan really breaks out that area with the specificity that we would see in this area plan, but.
Imagine, you know, we earlier adopted the LWRP, and Jeff took some of these projects and built them into the LWRP already. I think there's two things there, maybe three. One would be greater interaction with Tonawanda and DOT, because as you saw in the data, there's a lot of interest in what can be done in Niagara Falls Boulevard. And so I think there probably is some kind of a conversation that needs to be had with the communities, probably the county, because of the many intersecting roads, and DOT to try to determine what we can make of the consultants' recommendations and how far we can go with those improvements. Second thing would be to take the components of this that match up with the areas that we have already defined as focal area plans in the comprehensive plan. I don't know that this becomes a focal area plan unto itself, but we have talked about Willow Ridge, and Willow Ridge, as you pointed out at the very beginning of this, is kind of isolated over there by Sweet Home Road, the 990, the Boulevard. And so one of the things we could do is to create a focal area plan for the Willow Ridge area. And third, I think, again, we can form some kind of group with Tonawanda and kind of look for other opportunities to implement some of these recommendations jointly along the corridor. Even if we can't do much with Niagara Falls Boulevard, we're waiting to see what Tonawanda's mixed-use zoning looks like. And I think there might be some opportunities there to look at what they're doing, look at what we're doing on our side, see if there's any way to synchronize that. And one of the other recommendations here is access management. And access management is always an important tool that you can use to try to improve the conditions along a corridor. I don't know what the willingness is to engage in that. DOT did a great job with us years ago on Transit Road. We always talked about maybe something along Niagara Falls Boulevard, and I think that's something the two towns could work with DOT on looking forward in the future.
For sure. Sure. Thanks, Stan.
Yep.
And because we couldn't let Amy escape Amherst, we're now going to have Dover Cole working hopefully soon on corridor analysis, connectivity analysis on Main Street, Snyder and Eggertsville. So we're excited about that. And of course, ongoing work at the mall and Central Park. So just because Amy really likes to jump on those morning flights from Newark. So I don't have anything else.
I'm all set, thank you.
Amy, thank you very much. Thank you to everybody at Dover Cole. Again, thank you to our planning department. We'll leave it for Tonawanda to see where we head jointly here, and we'll go from there. All right, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.